The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, and especially its first recovered memory, is full of contradictions and loose clues that build up and then leaves us hanging wondering how we possibly ended up with this Hyrule. From a complicated but at the same time traceable timeline with established rules, it appears that everything from the series has been washed and mixed together, resulting in Era of the Wild Hyrule. Despite this convoluted mess, it appears that a few things have survived the test of time and the time paradoxes, like the history of Hyrule, which has been preserved in the ruins and by the races found across Hyrule. In this video, we'll go over how complicated but at the same time connected the past is with the present. Our idea is not to point out to any specific timeline placement, but rather show how Breath of the Wild represents a timeline which the connection has still not been outlined. Nevertheless, Breath of the Wild is a homage to the entire series, and hence before we start, we're setting a few rules of what we will cover. Generally, we're sticking to the races and built or carved by these structures found in the base game. In other words, we'll be staying away from DLC masks, amiibo attire, and weapons, and completely ignore place names. Why? As all of these are very likely only Easter eggs to us longtime fans of the Zelda franchise. One more thing, we're starting from the beginning in the times of Skyward Sword and then moving down from the unified timeline down to the timeline split, then the child timeline, adult timeline, and finally the downfall timeline. Though quickly before we begin, the existing timeline prior to Breath of the Wild in the distant past are all considered as era of myths. Hence, all timeline branches and even the unified timelines are seen as legends and myths by the Hylians of the era of the Wild, but as we all know, are still tied to the official Zelda canon. So join us on this journey, but first be sure to leave a like and subscribe and press that shiny notification bell as we begin our journey deep inside Breath of the Wild and rest of the Legend of Zelda's timeline and location and how the two connect together.
Then let's go back all the way to the beginning, the three golden goddesses. The most crucial clue to their existence and acknowledgement is found in Hyrule Castle Sanctum, where we find the Triforce and notes of Zelda's lullaby, or actually the Ballad of the Goddess. But what does that have to do with the three golden goddesses, Din, Nehru, and Farore? Well, that's quite simple, as this is a fragment piece that actually depicts Skyward Sword's Gate of Time, found in Skyward Sword and on the cover of Hyrule Historia. Here we see that the Sanctum crate is missing the crests of the goddesses and the outer part of the Gate of Time, but otherwise is an exact copy. In other words, we are already touching on some heavy Skyward Sword connections found inside Breath of the Wild. Goddess Hylia is central to Era of the Wild Hyrule, as it is through her Era of the Wild Zelda prays to unlock her sealing power, and it is the blessings from the goddess statues and Sheikah monks that are granted to Link. The best evidence of the goddess Hylia and Breath of the Wild Sheikah plan is where we obtain the set of the Hero of the Wild, namely at the bottom of the preserved statue of goddess Hylia from the Era of the Sky in the Forgotten Temple, which again is the Seal Temple. Now, there are several clues, but the most crucial of them, and which Zeltic pointed out in his video on this location, are the trees sticking out just like in the Seal Temple in Skyward Sword. This location is fascinating, but luckily for all of us, Zeltic has already made a video on the topic, so go and watch it after we are done with this one. At the same time, what else took place on and at the bottom of the great statue of the goddess? Zelda handed Link, her chosen hero of the sky, her sailcloth. And then the same hero wished for the destruction of the imprisoned demise after reassembling the Triforce in Sky Keep. At the statue's feet, the first hero landed, proving his worth to the princess, and the hero of the wild obtained the cap, tunic, and trousers of the wild. These again are not connected to Skyward Sword, though they are green, but we will get back to them later. But there is more, as this may just be a reference, but it is a little too similar to ignore. Namely, the way you obtain the paraglider from King Rome in Breath of the Wild, which is more or less identical to how we obtained the sailcloth from Princess Zelda in Skyward Sword. Both mark the true beginning of the quest, and both are tools for gliding in the sky. But these two items could serve as a connection from the hero of the sky to the hero of the wild, and the spirit of the wild who needs to rise to fight Demise's curse time and time again. Link without bird power cannot fly, and luckily at Woodland Stable we have a kid referencing Skyloft and majestic loft wings found in the Era of the Sky.
Still, we're only getting started as the timeline connections to Skyward Sword go way beyond the Gate of Time, the statues of Goddess Hylia, the paraglider, and some child talking about Skyloft and Loftwinds, as some of the locations crucial to Zelda's awakening as Hylia's incarnation in Skyward Sword were the Skyview Spring and Earth Spring. And fittingly enough, Zelda of the Wild follows in her grace and the goddess' first bloodline incarnation by praying in the waters of the same springs. The only difference being that they now share the virtues of Din and Nehru, namely are called the Springs of Power and Wisdom. These two locations were clearly included in Breath of the Wild to show the connection Zelda of the Wild shares to Zelda of Skyloft and hence Goddess Hylia. Zelda of the Wild prays to awaken the hidden sealing power within her, while Zelda of Skyloft does the same with Impa to realize her position as the first incarnation of Hylia. Both wear similar divine garments while conducting these rituals, and these in itself are closely connected. In other words, the emphasis of the blood of the goddess and the spirit of the hero are heavily soaked into the plot and world of Breath of the Wild. And it goes even deeper, as we haven't even touched upon the Master Sword. First and foremost, its design is identical with the version of the sword found in Skyward Sword, but what truly brings it home for the Blade of Evil's Bane is this sound. After Link succumbs to his wounds, that is none other than Fi, the spirit inside the Master Sword, calling to its lethally wounded master. And this is where we get into a very interesting point about the Master Sword, namely how it chooses the hero worthy to wield it. When Goddess Hylia crafted the Goddess Sword, she also created the spirit Fi to reside in the blade and assist the Goddess' chosen hero. Together, the Hero of the Sky and Fi forged the Goddess Sword into the Master Sword, which was then again turned into the true Master Sword by the reincarnated Goddess Hylia, Zelda of Skyloft. When Link then returned the Blade of Evil's Bane after sealing demise in it, Fi remained in the blade and, as was pointed out in Breath of the Wild, never left. Instead, she determined who had inherited the spirit of the hero and hence was chosen to wield and face Demise's reincarnated hatred with the Blade of Evil's Bane. In other words, Fi is the most important proof of Breath of the Wild's connection to the existing timeline, as Skyward Sword started it all. And this brings us to another crucial detail, namely the theme of beginning and end in Breath of the Wild. Namely that Fi, a being from the very beginning of chronicled history, is still around several tens of thousands of years later. More so, she's the only humanoid being spirit left from the eras predating the Kingdom of Hyrule. Fi is likely unique as the only entity left from the era of the goddess Hylia, but the many ruins from the distant past dotting Hyrule also stem from this time or shortly after the Skyloftians returned to the surface and became Hylians. It all shows how long and connected the history of Hyrule is, but it also explains the Sheikah Renaissance. Since when we think about it, Fi may not be the only being still around from the era of Goddess Hylia, as the Sheikah in Breath of the Wild are the most intelligent race in the entire series, wielding technology which surpasses anything we have seen to this point in the Zelda series. It's just that this technology is called ancient for a reason, as it goes back all the way to the era of Goddess Hylia prior to Skyward Sword. As Rinkuto highlighted in his excellent French Zelda theory documentary on the subject, it is entirely possible that the Sheikah monks we encounter in the era of the Wild might have known and even served Goddess Hylia in the era of her grace. Let me elaborate. Goddess Hylia knew prior to her battle with Demise that the peaceful era following the era of creation was coming to a close, and that she had to act to prevent a future dominated by reincarnating evil. Hylia simply foresaw the dangers ahead and acted accordingly to give the surface and its people a fighting chance. In his theory, Rinkuto points out that it is likely that the goddess tasked her chosen people, the Sheikah, to not waste their lives to defend an immortal goddess from Demise's hordes, but rather travel to the distant future to prepare for a decisive confrontation, where they would need to test and aid the chosen Link on his pathway to become the hero Hyrule needed. Thus, by using the Gate of Time, the Sheikah tribe left to travel far into the distant future to fulfill this mission, and with them brought their advanced technology to prepare for the battle that would end the tragic cycle. Hylia and the Sheikah knew that this battle would bring unspeakable devastation, so their plan A was containment. It is first when the plan would fail and Hyrule would fall that plan B would kick in. When we speak about the Gate of Time, it goes in line with the importance of time in the Zelda series, as the time shift stones can be molded into tools that offer the greatest weapon in all of Hyrule, time travel. We don't have to look further than the Master Sword and the Ocarina of Time to understand the importance of this mechanism. Without them, the Hero of Time would never have made his way to challenge Ganondorf to a decisive duel in the Adult and Downfall timeline branches. To put it like this, The Timeshift Stones were as crucial as the Triforce, partially as both were left behind by the Golden Goddesses. It's just that the Triforce during the rule of the goddess was useless, as Hylia couldn't wield it as long as she remained an immortal goddess. The Timeshift Stones, on the other hand, came with no such limitations, and could be utilized to their fullest potential both in the era of Goddess Hylia and for time preservation of the Sheikah, who most likely followed orders and left behind Impa, who would take care of Goddess Hylia and her mortal incarnation. Meanwhile, they would aid the Hylians in the distant future and prepare for the hero that would finally challenge the curse itself. First by building the Guardians and Divine Beasts that would defend the land, then when this defensive line was in place and the Sheikah bloodline secured, the aging Sheikah would construct shrines to preserve themselves in stasis in Timeshift Stone chambers, waiting for the day their plan of defense would fail. The Kingdom of Hyrule would fall, and a new hero would rise to face Demise's hatred reincarnated, Ganondorf. A crucial part of this plan B was to find out if this link was worthy of Hylia's blessing and the title of the true hero of Hyrule, which brings us to Breath of the Wild 2. Since the only way to travel such a ridiculous amount of years is through the Gate of Time, which required a ridiculous amount of Timeshift Stones to be crafted in the first place. Hence, before continuing our hunt for Zelda Timeline connections in Breath of the Wild, we will next week go deep into Skyward Swords and possibly Breath of the Wild 2's Gate of Time. Until then, be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe and press that shiny notification bell for all notifications to not miss the next videos in this mini-series. Finally, a big thanks goes to all our great patrons on patreon.com/commonrealm, and we would greatly appreciate if you could join them or by pressing the join button here on YouTube. Until the next Zelda video, which we will work really hard on, make sure to check out one of these two awesome videos.